Thank you for joining the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for our weekly online Ministers Forum. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister of the Congregation. These programs are conversations with community organizers, scholars, religious leaders, artists, and others about how we can collectively address the present crises. Their purpose is to offer members of our community and all who wish to join us online science-based resources and liberation-oriented inspiration to get through these difficult times. Today, I'm joined by Carol Burrus, Director of Religious Community for the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. We'll be talking about the congregation's climate justice efforts and plans for the month leading up to Earth Day. Carol oversees First Houston's religious education for children and youth. She's a long-standing activist for environmental justice here in the state of Texas. Carol, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I thought we'd just start out by asking kind of the most, basic of questions, which is why is it important for First Houston to be involved in addressing the climate crisis?
Well, as the Director of Religious Community for our church, it is my belief that people come to church in order to be their best self and to reach out to the community and do good works. And so being involved in environmental activism and learning about the ways that we can live more sustainability makes a lot of sense.
Is there like a particular aspect of Unitarian Universalism or our particular congregation, though, that makes it to be specifically important for First Houston, or is it just kind of like a thing that you think that, like, as a religious community, we kind of should be doing?
Well, I could talk a little bit about how I think it's important for us to connect to people locally. And maybe before I talk about that, I could say why, for Unitarian and Universalists in particular, that we are called to act on this as part of our faith. And that is that Unitarian Universalists don't have a creed, but we do have a set of 7 principles. And there are a few of them that really, I think, are directly related to this value. And the most important one, I think, is the respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person, as well as respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So the first one calls us to act on behalf of our neighbors and all people in our community. If we are having habits that hurt others, either directly or indirectly, we need to be aware of those and then make changes or advocate on the level of systemic change in order to make a difference for those people's lives. And for our own lives, because we are in, a climate crisis that will affect us all. As far as the respect for the interdependent web of all existence, we have, this is both a respect and of which we are a part. So we know that we are a part of the interdependent web of all existence. As human beings, we often think of ourselves as separate from nature, but in fact, we are very much connected. And showing respect for that is part of what we're called to do as Unitarian Universalists. So acting locally is really the best opportunity because we can develop relationships. We can develop relationships with the people who are most affected by climate change. We can listen to their needs and we can respond accordingly. We can develop relationships with other people in our community in order to build collective power. And we can also reach down into the actual soil below our feet, because that is where our environment is. We can do direct service by planting native plants, by learning to garden, and by doing any kinds of hands-on help for our neighbors.
So you just sort of outlined 3 things, right? Like connecting with people who are most impacted, organizing for collective power, and then engaging directly with nature and the soil. I think that it'd be great if you could actually give kind of an example from the congregation's history or from recent activities of each of those. I mean, especially here in Houston, right? Because like the first one, climate change, like in this city we had Hurricane Harvey, we had the Arctic freeze, we had Tropical Storm Imelda. I mean, the climate crisis impacts everybody here. Maybe not equally, but it certainly, I was without clean water for a week during the Arctic freeze, and I know that is not an unusual experience.
Right, right. I mean, climate is going to affect everyone. But what happens is that for people who have money, there's insurance, they can hire a plumber to come, and if it's a few $1,000s, they're able to afford it. But for people who are barely getting food on the table, that's just not an option. And once those environmental crises happen, it's very difficult. I heard recently on the radio that there are people in some communities who have yet to have repairs from Hurricane Harvey, much less the Arctic freeze.
Well, I've met people in Houston since I've been living here who have thousands of dollars of debt because they didn't have insurance or the appropriate kind of insurance, and their car was totaled during Hurricane Harvey, right? And so they may be fine in terms of having a place to live, but they're still recovering economically and probably will be for quite some time from the hurricane.
That's right. So even for people who can't afford to own their own home or choose to rent, they would have, cars perhaps, and those are often ruined by flooding in Houston. That has happened over many, many years. But the difference now is that due to carbon, what happens is that the atmosphere is heating up, and as it heats up, it holds more moisture. And so the likelihood of these storms holding more water and doing what I've heard is called rain bombs, where there's so much water coming down in such a short period of time that there's no way that the regular bios and even the streets that become a way for water to get away from property, they fail us because there's just too much water coming down. And that brings me to what I wanted to say about one of First Church's roles is advocacy. Because if we understand that the regular ways of doing things that have typically been what states and cities have responded to the needs of a city related to weather, and really related to lots of things like also traffic flow and housing needs, is to build. Houston is great at building. We can build wider and wider freeways. We can build more and more concrete bios. We can build huge tanks to hold water. But what we're not good at is doing the more kind of sustainable practices, like making sure that that trees and greenery can absorb water, or that there's less concrete so that water can have a place to go into the soil. And instead, we just want to build and build and build. So if there's a different perspective that can be told to the leaders, or actually kind of demanded through various types of practices, then there's more listening that might happen.
So how does that relate to your second point of building collective power?
So, well, we have some collective power. One way that we had collective power most recently is through UU the Vote. I mean, as we got so many, and maybe you'll remember the numbers of people that we were able to reach through UU the Vote.
Oh, no, I mean, what First Houston was able to get through UU the Vote, and our efforts there were nothing short of, I think, extraordinary for our congregation. We had over 42 or 43,000 contacts with voters and coordinated the work of 7 congregations. And I think, the exact number escapes me, but it's like 288 or 290 volunteers. I mean, it was an incredible effort on the part of the congregation.
And in addition, we connected directly with other congregations in the state of Texas and one in Arkansas in order to coordinate our work. And then we combined that effort with all over the United States through the Unitarian Universalist Association, and had an even bigger impact in the election. And the reason I, as an environmental activist, decided that voting was where I wanted to put my efforts, is because I can make individual change in my habits. I can advocate for that to other people. I can role model. I can even speak to my city council. But if nationally we have leaders that are making choices to move us towards a more sustainable future, then it happens faster, it happens bigger, and it's just the best thing we can do. Otherwise, we have people in power who absolutely block us from doing anything. We even have people in the state legislature right now who are creating they're creating laws that keep local governments from being able to make choices to fight against climate change and the effects of climate change. So we need those leaders in the uppermost positions in order to have success.
I want to get to your next point, and then I want to come back to something about kind of how we're different from a community organization as a religious organization that cares about these things. But first, before we get there, I'd love to hear more about sort of the third thing you lifted up, was sort of getting our hands into the soil and connecting to the natural world.
Yeah, so one of the things I feel really great about that we've done at the church is that we connect with other organizations in order to, like Willow Waterhole and the Interfaith Environmental Network of Houston, to go and do hands-on work, like to plant native plants in those areas that absorb water for our floods, but also provide habitat for birds and bees and make beauty as well. And we have put in our own garden in the front in order to have herbs and vegetables. And we use that as a learning tool for religious education program, so that the children a few times per season have a chance to plant, have a chance to harvest, learn about soil, learn about compost and worms and that kind of thing. And as you can imagine, the kids, most of the kids really like that. Of course, not all, but
Sure.
it is a wonderful thing, because going forward, growing more local food is really likely to be part of our future. And in order for us to provide that kind of education and experience for children, is it just feels really great to me. And in addition, related to that and soil and hands-on things, is that we have a compost heap. We have a couple of them. And so that has allowed us, so that when we met in person and we had coffee on Sunday morning, we could put those grounds into the compost instead of into the trash. And we could also, when our flowers from the Sunday morning service had lived past their prime, we could also put them in the compost, as well as leaves and grass from the cuttings that happen at the church. And the few vegetables and fruits that we cut up during the week end up in there too. So that feels really good, because when you put compost in the garbage, it creates a really bad environment for creating more carbon in the air than if it ends up in compost, where it can turn into wonderful soil. So it's just such a better choice. And when you understand what happens chemically and how that's causing more problems for our atmosphere, then to be able to do that at the church instead of just the old ways feels great.
So I think, right, we're talking, First Houston is a religious community. And you kind of talked about these environmental justice activities, or these climate crisis, these activities to address the climate crisis, or work we're doing, right? So organizing for collective power, working with people who've been particularly impacted by the climate crisis, and I think educating people in their connection with the soil, including sort of thinking about local food. How is this religious activity? Like, why is this something that we as a religious community should be doing or should care about? Since, I mean, most of those things, like my friends who identify as secular, for instance, would be like, yeah, that all sounds like things that we should do. Those are things that I do. So what is it about us as a religious community that makes this work important to us? Or how is it, maybe a better way to ask that question is, how is this work an expression of who we are as a religious community?
Yes, well, I will start by saying that I do think that beliefs in justice and equity and compassion and the inherent worth and dignity of every person and understanding the interdependent web of all existence are things that we can share with people who share the same values, even if they don't, go to the same church, right, or the same, or
Mhm.
even attend any religious community. And that doesn't mean that we don't call them religious values. But I would say that people can have religious experiences in nature and in the connection to nature, sacred experiences, um, uh, even sort of over the top, sort of emotional connection to all of existence, to the mystery of the world. And the fact is, we are absolutely connected to the earth. We came from the earth. Every day we could not survive for more than probably a few hours without sunshine, without the food that comes from the earth, without water. And so our connection to the earth is both physical and also spiritual, if in the broadest sense of the word spiritual, in that those connections to the questions that are big, like why are we here, and is there a God, and and for many people the connection to nature is really a part of their spiritual life.
Well, I mean, I think you sort of outlined something that I think is really important for Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalists, which is we are a religious community that is very much oriented to what is going on in this world, and that we think, and I think this bears out with the climate advocacy, that this is the world that we inhabit. We are part and parcel of it. There may be another world to come, or there may be additional dimensions beyond this one. But this is where we are, and this is where we're part of, and we have an obligation to take care of it, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And I would argue, in part, because we are part of it, right? So, there are a lot of theological accounts that sort of put humanity as something other than nature. But, I mean, with the seventh principle, the interdependent web of all existence that of which we are all part, that is part of the Unitarian Universalist Association's principles, like we're making a claim that, we are all wrapped up in this together, and that our ecological activity, our choices around climate justice, come from that sense of oneness and wholeness with the natural world.
And absolutely. And if we come from this earth, and I'm comfortable with using the phrase Mother Earth, the earth is our mother. That won't work for everyone, but for me that resonates. And to trash her, to poison her, to have, just to have so little respect. And I think a lot of it is not on purpose, but due to a lack of awareness and a sense of, just what's on my agenda right now is more important than that bigger picture of where we came from. And I think that's what it is we're taken back to where we came from and what we are truly connected to, and that which we could not live without. And as our human communities live on this space that is the earth from which we came.
Well, I think, Carol, what that's just such a wonderful illustration of is how our actions, our ethics, the choices that we make in the world as people are guided by our sort of theological understandings, right? And so this activity that, to my secular friends would appear as just, social justice organizing or ecological justice organizing is actually supported by this deep theological understanding of what our connection is to, all of existence. I think that, your work and the congregation's work around climate justice is a really beautiful example of that.
Thank you.
I wonder, in that vein, if you could talk a bit about what the congregation has done in the past around climate justice and addressing the climate crisis.
Yeah, well, I mentioned a few, like building the garden and the compost, and changing all of our light bulbs to LED, and reducing our the temperature of our water heater. We also added 72 windows of solar film that allows us to keep out heat and therefore use less energy as we heat the building. We use all renewable energy sources for our energy in our building. And we have had plenty of educational activities for members with a plant-based lunch, and we have done advocacy at City Council. And going forward, we have some really exciting things that we're getting ready to start right now, so you can watch for dates coming up really soon. And those include ministers' forums like this. We're having at least a couple of people who will be talking as experts on environmental themes and local sustainability. We also will be reading the book Climate Courage in our Saturday morning adult program work. There's going to be a discussion group on a Sunday morning about sustainability. We'll also have an Earth Day service on April the 18th that's co-led by our high school youth. And you'll have an invitation to meet us down at Discovery Green for the Earth Day activities that occur on April 18th in the afternoon. We're also creating opportunities for people to shift their own practices and advocate for change, as we were talking about how important those are. And we'll have a couple of groups that are talking about how you can specifically reduce your carbon footprint, and a follow-up group so that you can hold yourself accountable and tell us what happened. We also have a thing where you can join us and cook a plant-based meal together online and then eat it together online. We'll do it together in person before too long. We also have an opportunity to go to City Council, which is also being held online, to a public session and speak about any issue related to sustainability, and we'll be happy to tell you some of the specifics that are going on that you could speak to by just having a conversation about that.
And you do that, Carol, you guys organize that, the Climate Action Team organizes that once a month, right? Or at least you were prior to COVID. I know because I'd been with you at least I think twice, to go and speak in front of City Council and advocate for the City Council's planning, or the City of Houston's plannings around greening and green activities.
Right. Mostly we talked to them about the climate action plan that the city did adopt about a year ago, and now it's time to go ask them, how is that going? And we want to hear how it's being implemented and how long it's going to take, and what their benchmarks are, to kind of continue to hold them accountable, but also just to let them know that there are plenty of people in the city of Houston who really care about this issue. And if you show up at City Council and there's enough of those voices, they're like, wow, a lot of people really care about this. Yeah. So also in the future, not happening right away, but we are planning to green our building again in the future, and we have some plans for that, and so watch for that.
Well, I mean, actually, I have to interrupt here because that is very much in process, right? And so we're planning on greening the building and replacing, for instance, the air conditioning units, which are old and not energy efficient, with energy efficient air conditioning units. I mean, which, does not sound like the most exciting thing in the world, right? Oh, we're going to get new air conditioning units. But I mean, the truth is, and I think that this is an important thing that, like, I've learned about climate justice, and is that actually the choices that we make around infrastructure and how we physically construct our society are the ones that have the biggest impact around the climate crisis and addressing the climate crisis. So by greening our buildings, greening our campuses, it is actually a major, statement, and a statement that, like, everybody needs to be making around moving towards a more sustainable future.
That's right. Building use, transportation, and how and where housing and offices are located, which affects how much people have to use transportation, is a huge piece of the organizational infrastructure for planning cities that affects climate change. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I mean, for myself, I don't own a car. I ride my bicycle or now in COVID, I don't take public transit.
So just the bicycle. Mm-hmm.
But I bicycle, right? I mean, and it's both healthy and, and it lessens my carbon footprint. But one thing, getting back to this infrastructure point and the point about being active with the city that's so important is I can only do that because I live in an area that I'm able to find a safe bike route to and from the Museum District campus. So much of Houston is profoundly unfriendly to both pedestrians and bicyclists, that even if you don't want to have a car, you have to, simply because of it's necessary to get around.
Right. It really does depend on what part of the city you live in, but there is good news on that front through Bike Houston and the park system. There is much construction around bike paths around the city, and many more than there were not that long ago. So that's good news, as well as trains.
Right. There's a lot of exciting work being done around public transit. I mean, over by the Galleria, they've put in a rapid transit bus line, which functions like a rail line. And there's several others of those either being planned or that have been constructed. So, Carol, we are running close to the end of time. We've got a couple minutes more, and before I'm going to let you have the last word and say a few more things. But before we do, I do want to just tell our listeners that one of the things that First Houston did recently after the Arctic freeze was we partnered with a community garden and a small family farm to help them reseed after their crops were destroyed. And this gets back to, the question of growing food locally and how important that is for the environment, and also how important small organic farms are for the environment compared to like big agricultural combines that are heavily dependent upon petrochemicals. And the church the congregation committed to raise $18,000 to help these small concerns that didn't have the insurance necessary to raise the money to reseed. And we found out yesterday that we made that goal. And so I think that that's a wonderful thing that we should be celebrating as a congregation right now.
Yes, it's so sad when sustainable practices that are put in and are just kind of barely making it are then ruined by the very things that are carbon footprint increase. So you've got these beautiful gardens, and then they get flooded by the poisons that are brought in by the flooding of Harvey, or this very thing with the winter freeze, which is the vortex that's bringing down this cold Arctic air in ways that we have historically never had. So yeah. So I just do have two more things that I would invite people to look forward to. And one is, if you want to be part of harvesting some beans and herbs and peppers, I can't tell you exactly when they're going to be ready to harvest, so watch for that. They'll be right there in the front garden, and we'll be inviting our kids to help with that too. And then we are hoping to be part of the City of Houston's resiliency plan along with Houston Wilderness, to plant 4.2 million trees. And that we're not sure exactly when that's going to happen, but we've been in touch with people to try to see how we can be part of that going forward, because planting trees gives us that hands-on thing. We're directly experiencing nature, which can be part of our spiritual life. And we can also be helping reduce the carbon for everyone who's a citizen of our city and our county to reduce the climate crisis.
Well, that's wonderful. And that was actually something that, for those of you who are members of First Houston, might remember a major effort we were planning on getting involved in last year before the pandemic struck. And so it's good to see that it is getting back on track as we, I hope, return to something that, I don't want to say normal, because what is normal, but resembles life before the pandemic, and are able to gather together and do work together again in the ways that we used to. So, well, thank you, Carol, so much for being with us. I think you provided a great overview of what the congregation is doing and why Unitarian Universalists care about climate justice. The next, I think, 3 forums we'll be devoting to climate crisis issues and environmental justice issues. We're still finalizing our guests, but I know one of the folks we have coming up is Jaime Gonzalez, who is, Carol, because you found him, who is he?
He is a wonderful educator, and he is someone who is very knowledgeable about native plants. And you are going to love hearing from him.
So he's going to be a guest, and we will have 2 more sort of folks as we're finalizing our roster here in the next couple weeks. So I hope that you'll join us. And for those of you who were with us for the first time, let me just say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We're a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe we need not think alike to love alike. Thanks so much, Carol, for being with us today.
Bye. Thank you.
And for those of you who are watching, if you found this video to be helpful, please consider joining us for our weekly worship service. Posted online each Sunday at 10:30 a.m. and features music and prayers in addition to a sermon. This week, I'm preaching an Easter sermon called Finding Each Other on the Road to Emmaus. Thank you to our staff for making this video possible. It was produced by Christian Holmes. Alma Viscara assisted with the editing. We'll see you all online soon and in person as soon as we can gather again. Please remember that no matter how isolated you feel, we are all in this together.